The biggest mistake you can make is assuming you know someone's worth by looking at them. The lunch crowd at Harvest Table was at its peak. The warm glow of hanging lights reflected off polished wood tables. Servers moved quickly between booths carrying trays of burgers, salads, and steaming bowls of soup. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the air. It was the kind of restaurant where families celebrated birthdays, business people closed deals, and regular customers were greeted by name. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped inside quietly. Her gray coat looked worn from years of use. Her sneakers carried traces of dust from the city sidewalks. She paused near the entrance and glanced around the dining room with calm, observant eyes. Her name was Naomi Carter. No one recognized her. No one noticed the way she studied every detail. The cleanliness of the floor, the smiles of the servers, the expressions on the customers' faces. She wasn't in a hurry. She simply walked toward the hostess stand and waited patiently. Before the hostess could speak, another voice cut through the room. "Can I help you?" Brandon Whitmore approached with the confident stride of someone who believed he controlled everything around him. He was the restaurant manager, proud of his position and even prouder of the reputation he had built for this location. His pressed shirt was flawless. His name badge gleamed under the lights. He looked Naomi up and down once. Then again. His expression changed immediately. Not curiosity, not concern, judgment. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked. Naomi offered a polite smile. "No, sir. Just a table for one." Brandon's eyes narrowed. Around them, the lunch rush continued, but several nearby customers began listening. Something about the exchange had shifted the atmosphere. "A table for one," he repeated. Naomi nodded. "And if possible, I'd like a bowl of soup." For a brief moment, silence lingered between them. Then Brandon laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because he had already made up his mind about her. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound polite, while still making sure people nearby could hear, "This restaurant serves paying customers." Naomi's smile faded slightly. "I am a paying customer." Brandon folded his arms. "Look, we both know that's not true." The words landed harder than he realized. A couple sitting nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. One server slowed her pace as she passed. Naomi remained calm. Her hands stayed relaxed at her sides. "I only came here for lunch," she said. Brandon shook his head. "No. You came in here because you saw a busy restaurant and thought someone might give you something for free." Naomi blinked once. Nothing more. No anger. No argument. Just quiet disbelief. Brandon stepped closer and gestured toward the door. "I'm going to save us both some time. This isn't a shelter." The room seemed to grow quieter with every word. Forks stopped moving. Conversations faded. Naomi looked around the dining room one more time. Not at the customers. Not at Brandon. At the employees. The servers. The hostess. The people who kept the restaurant running. Then she returned her gaze to Brandon and spoke so softly that he almost missed it. "You should be careful what assumptions you make about people." Brandon smirked. "And you should find somewhere else to eat." What he didn't know was that the next 30 minutes were about to change his life forever. Naomi held Brandon's gaze for another second, then gave a small nod as if she had just confirmed something important. She did not argue. She did not demand an apology. Instead, she turned and walked toward the door. The bell above the entrance chimed softly as she stepped back onto the sidewalk. A cool breeze drifted through the street, carrying the distant sound of traffic and the scent of rain that seemed to be gathering somewhere beyond the city skyline. Inside the restaurant, conversations slowly returned, but something felt different. Customers who had witnessed the exchange were no longer focused on their meals. Several glanced toward the windows, watching Naomi cross the street. Brandon straightened his tie and forced a confident smile. "All right, everybody, back to enjoying your lunch." A few people nodded. Most did not. Across the street, Naomi settled onto a weathered wooden bench beneath a maple tree. The leaves above her rustled softly. She placed her purse beside her and looked back at the restaurant. From a distance, Harvest Table appeared perfect. Clean windows, bright signs, a full parking lot, the image of success. But Naomi had spent years learning that appearances rarely told the whole story. Through the glass, she watched employees move across the dining room. One server hurried from table to table with tired eyes. Another seemed afraid to make even the smallest mistake. Near the hostess stand, the young waitress who had offered her water stood quietly while Brandon spoke to her. Even from across the street, Naomi could see the disappointment on the young woman's face. Naomi reached into her purse and removed a small black notebook. Its cover showed signs of age from years of use. She opened it carefully and began writing. Her handwriting was neat and deliberate. Brandon Whitmore. Branch 214. Customer interaction failure. Employee treatment concerns. She paused for a moment. Then she added another name. Lily Martinez. Demonstrated compassion under pressure. Naomi closed the notebook and rested it on her lap. She remembered a lesson her grandfather had taught her decades earlier. You learn more about a person when they think nobody important is watching. The memory brought the faintest smile to her face. Back inside the restaurant, Brandon was already telling the story to a group of employees. You have to protect the brand, he said confidently. One bad impression can cost a business thousands of dollars. Several workers nodded because they felt obligated to. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Lily remained silent. Brandon noticed. Something you want to say? He asked. No, sir, she replied quietly. Good. Meanwhile, Naomi pulled out her phone. The screen reflected the gray afternoon light. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she rarely used. The call connected almost immediately. Good afternoon, Miss Carter, a voice answered. Naomi glanced once more at the restaurant. Please come to branch 214. There was a brief pause. Is there a problem? Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. I believe. There is. The voice became serious immediately. Understood. We are on our way. The call ended. Naomi slipped the phone back into her purse and folded her hands calmly. She did not look angry. She did not look offended. She looked patient, as if she had all the time in the world. 20 minutes later, a black SUV turned onto the street. Then another. Then a third. Naomi watched the vehicles approach without changing her expression. Across the street, several customers near the windows began pointing toward the parking lot. Inside Harvest Table, Brandon followed their gaze. The confident smile on his face slowly disappeared. The first black SUV rolled slowly into the parking lot and stopped near the entrance. Then a second vehicle pulled in behind it. Then a third. The polished windows reflected the gray afternoon sky as employees and customers pressed closer to the glass. Inside Harvest Table, an uneasy silence spread through the dining room. Brandon stood near the hostess stand, trying to maintain the confidence he had worn all day, but something about the scene outside made his stomach tighten. Corporate visits were rare. Unannounced corporate visits were almost unheard of. One of the servers glanced toward him nervously. Did they tell us someone was coming? Brandon forced a laugh. Of course not. They probably just want to check numbers. But even he did not sound convinced. Across the street, Naomi remained seated on the bench. Her hands rested calmly on her purse. She watched as the SUV doors opened one by one. Men and women in business attire stepped onto the sidewalk. Their expressions were serious, focused, not the look of people arriving for a routine visit. The tallest among them adjusted his navy suit and immediately spotted Naomi. Ethan Reynolds, regional director for more than 100 locations across the country. His pace slowed the moment he saw her. Then he walked directly toward her. Through the restaurant windows, Brandon noticed the movement. Why are they talking to her? He whispered. Nobody answered. Customers exchanged confused looks. Employees stared openly now. Ethan stopped in front of Naomi and offered a respectful nod. Good afternoon, Miss Carter. Naomi stood. Thank you for coming so quickly. Ethan glanced toward the restaurant. Your call sounded serious. Naomi looked through the windows toward the dining room. I wanted to see how this branch operates when nobody important is expected. Ethan followed her gaze. His expression darkened slightly. And what did you find? Naomi opened her black notebook. Enough. She closed it again without elaborating. Ethan did not ask further questions. He already understood. Behind him, the rest of the corporate team waited quietly. Human resources, operations, compliance. They all knew Naomi rarely visited locations personally. When she did, there was always a reason. Inside Harvest Table, Brandon could feel the atmosphere changing by the second. The confidence he had relied on all afternoon was beginning to crack. He watched as Ethan stepped aside for Naomi, allowing her to walk ahead. That small gesture unsettled him more than anything else. Who is she? One customer asked aloud. No one knew. The front doors opened. A rush of cool air drifted through the restaurant. Conversations stopped completely. Even the kitchen staff peeked through the service window. Naomi entered first. Ethan followed. Then the rest of the corporate team. Brandon immediately straightened his posture and forced a professional smile. "Mr. Reynolds," he said quickly. "What a surprise. Welcome to Branch 214. Ethan did not return the smile. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. Brandon noticed. The room noticed. Something was very wrong. Lily stood frozen near the beverage station. Her eyes widened as she watched Naomi walk calmly through the restaurant she had been removed from less than 30 minutes earlier. Naomi did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. She simply looked observant, like someone reviewing a report she had already finished reading. Brandon cleared his throat. "If there is anything I can do to help." Ethan finally turned toward him. "Actually," he said quietly, "there is." The dining room became so silent that the faint hum of the ceiling lights seemed louder than before. Brandon swallowed hard. Ethan stepped forward and looked around the room. Then he said the words that caused every employee and customer to stare at Naomi in complete disbelief. "I think it is time everyone here understands exactly who Ms. Carter is." The words seemed to hang in the air long after Ethan finished speaking. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the only sound inside the restaurant was the faint hum of the refrigeration units behind the counter. Brandon stared at Naomi as if he had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. His mind searched desperately for another explanation. There had to be one. This woman could not possibly be who Ethan was implying she was. Not the woman he had dismissed. Not the woman he had judged before she even sat down. Naomi stood quietly in the center of the dining room. Her gray coat looked exactly the same as it had 30 minutes earlier. Her worn sneakers had not changed. Nothing about her appearance was different. Yet somehow everything in the room felt different now. The customers who had witnessed her humiliation looked at her with new eyes. Employees who had barely noticed her before now watched her with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Brandon forced out a nervous laugh. "I am sorry. I think there has been some misunderstanding." Ethan slowly turned toward him. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said. "But not the one you think." Brandon felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Naomi remained silent. She was not enjoying this moment. That was what unsettled him most. She was not smiling. She was not seeking revenge. She simply observed, the same way she had observed everything since walking through the front door. Ethan looked around the dining room. "This is Naomi Carter," he said clearly. "Founder, majority owner, and chief executive of every Harvest Table location in the country." Gasps spread through the room. One customer nearly dropped a glass. Another covered her mouth in disbelief. Lily stood frozen beside the beverage station, her eyes wide. Brandon blinked repeatedly. "Chief executive?" he whispered. The words barely left his mouth. Ethan nodded. "She built this company from a single restaurant 23 years ago." Brandon's face lost all color. 23 years. While he had spent years managing one location, Naomi had spent decades building an entire national brand. The realization hit him harder with every passing second. Naomi slowly removed the black notebook from her purse. The small movement captured everyone's attention. She opened it and looked down at the notes she had written earlier. "Interesting," she said softly. Brandon swallowed. "Miss Carter, I can explain." Naomi raised her eyes toward him. "Can you?" The question was calm, respectful, even. Yet Brandon could not answer. Because he already knew the truth. There was nothing to explain. He had not made a mistake because he was confused. He had made a decision. He had looked at someone and decided what they were worth before speaking to them. Naomi closed the notebook. "Tell me something, Brandon." His throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi glanced around the restaurant. "How many customers have you welcomed through these doors this year?" Brandon hesitated. "Thousands." "And how many did you judge before learning who they were?" The question landed like a weight across the entire room. Nobody looked away. Brandon stared at the floor. For the first time all afternoon, he could not find a single confident answer. Naomi studied him for a moment. Then her attention shifted toward Lily. The young waitress immediately straightened. Naomi's expression softened slightly. "You offered water to a stranger." Lily nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am." Naomi smiled faintly. "Why?" Lily looked surprised by the question. "Because she looked like she needed it." Naomi glanced at Ethan, then back at Lily. "That answer might be the most important thing I have heard all day." Ethan nodded slowly. But Brandon noticed something else. Naomi was still holding the notebook, and she had not yet revealed everything she had written inside. The notebook suddenly felt heavier than paper and ink. Every employee in the restaurant seemed unable to look away from it. Brandon certainly could not. His eyes followed the small black cover as though the answers to his future were hidden inside its pages. Naomi held it calmly against her side and walked a few steps through the dining room. The polished floor reflected the warm overhead lights. Customers remained seated, but nobody was eating anymore. The entire restaurant had become an audience to something far bigger than lunch service. Naomi paused beside a table near the front windows. A half-finished sandwich sat untouched on a plate. A glass of iced tea had begun to sweat against a napkin. Ordinary details, the kind most people never noticed. Naomi noticed everything. That was how she had built a company. Not by watching profits first, by watching people. She turned back toward Brandon. Do you know what I look for when I visit a location? Brandon shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. Most managers think I am checking sales numbers. Her voice remained soft. Some think I am looking at customer counts. Others think I care most about expenses. She glanced around the room. They are all wrong. Nobody spoke. Naomi continued. The first thing I look for is how employees treat people who cannot do anything for them. Brandon lowered his eyes. The sentence seemed to strike every corner of the restaurant. Naomi opened the notebook again. The sound of the cover folding back felt unusually loud. She scanned a page. At 12:22 this afternoon, a customer dropped a fork. A busser picked it up before being asked. She flipped another page. At 12:26, a server noticed an elderly guest struggling to read the menu and offered help. Another page turned. At 12:31, a young waitress offered a glass of water to someone everyone else ignored. Lily blinked rapidly. She looked as though she wished she could disappear. Naomi smiled gently. Kindness leaves a trail. I have learned to follow it. Several customers nodded quietly. Ethan folded his arms and watched Brandon carefully. The manager looked smaller now. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had completely vanished. Naomi closed the notebook once more. Do you know what else leaves a trail? She asked. Brandon swallowed hard. No, ma'am. Arrogance. The word lingered in the air. Nobody challenged it. Nobody could. Naomi stepped closer. Not aggressively. Simply close enough that he had to meet her eyes. You never asked my name. Brandon's face tightened. No, ma'am. You never asked why I came here. No, ma'am. You never even gave me the opportunity to sit down. Each sentence landed with quiet precision. Naomi was not raising her voice. She did not need to. The truth was doing all the work for her. Through the windows, dark clouds had begun gathering above the city skyline. The afternoon light dimmed slightly. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere felt even heavier. Brandon finally spoke. I made a terrible mistake. Naomi studied him for several seconds. Then she nodded once. Yes, you did. The answer was honest. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ethan stepped forward with a folder in his hand. Brandon noticed it immediately. Several members of the corporate team exchanged glances. Naomi noticed that too. Her eyes moved from the folder to Ethan's face. Then back to Brandon. Something important was about to happen. And for the first time since she entered the restaurant, Naomi looked genuinely disappointed. Naomi's gaze lingered on the folder in Ethan's hand. The disappointment in her eyes was not the disappointment of a business owner looking at poor numbers. It was something deeper, more personal, the kind that came from seeing potential wasted. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped softly against the restaurant windows. The sound was gentle, almost soothing, but inside Harvest Table nobody felt relaxed. Ethan looked at Naomi carefully. Would you like me to proceed? He asked. Naomi took a slow breath. For a moment she did not answer. Her eyes drifted across the dining room. She saw the hostess standing nervously behind her station. She saw cooks peeking from the kitchen. She saw customers who had witnessed every moment of the afternoon. Most of all, she saw Lily. The young waitress still looked uncertain, as though she could not believe any of this was real. Naomi finally nodded. Go ahead. Ethan opened the folder. The crisp sound of paper turning seemed unusually loud. Brandon stared at the documents. His heartbeat felt heavy in his chest. He had spent years building his reputation inside the company, years chasing promotions, bonuses, and recognition. Yet suddenly none of that felt secure anymore. Ethan looked down at the first page. Over the past 6 months, Branch 214 has received an unusually high number of employee turnover reports. Brandon blinked. That has nothing to do with this. Ethan calmly continued. Customer satisfaction scores have also declined. Several employees exchanged surprised looks. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. We have still been profitable. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Profitable businesses fail every day. The room fell silent again. She walked slowly toward one of the windows. Rain streaked down the glass now, blurring the view of the parking lot outside. The gray sky reflected faintly across the polished floor. When I opened my first restaurant, Naomi said quietly, I had 4 tables, 1 cook, and a leaking roof. Everyone listened. Some days I barely made enough money to keep the lights on. She smiled faintly at the memory. But people came back. Her fingers brushed lightly against the window frame. Do you know why? Nobody answered. Naomi turned toward the room. Because they felt respected. The words settled heavily over everyone present. Brandon lowered his eyes. Naomi continued. People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what they ordered. Ethan closed the folder. He no longer needed to read from it. The lesson had become bigger than the paperwork. Naomi looked at Brandon again. There was no anger in her expression. That somehow made the moment harder. Anger can pass. Disappointment stays. I have visited dozens of locations without announcing who I am, she said. Some managers welcomed me. Some ignored me. A few judged me. Her eyes remained fixed on Brandon. You were not the first. Hope flickered briefly across his face. Then Naomi added, but you are the first who punished kindness. The hope disappeared immediately. Lily looked down. Naomi walked toward her and offered a gentle smile. You saw a human being. That should never be considered a mistake. Lily's eyes filled with emotion. Around them, employees began looking at one another differently. The atmosphere inside the restaurant was changing. Not because the owner had arrived. Because the truth had arrived. Ethan gathered the papers and closed the folder completely. Naomi noticed the gesture. She knew what came next. And judging by the tension spreading through Brandon's face, he knew it too. Rain continued sliding down the windows in thin silver lines. The dining room felt quieter than ever. Customers remained in their seats. Employees stood frozen in place. And even the kitchen seemed to have stopped moving. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Brandon could feel dozens of eyes on him. Just an hour earlier, he had walked through the restaurant believing he controlled everything inside those walls. Now he stood in the center of the room, feeling smaller with every passing second. Ethan placed the closed folder under his arm and looked toward Naomi. He knew her well enough to recognize the expression on her face. She was thinking, not about punishment, not about embarrassment, about consequences. There was a difference. Naomi folded her hands in front of her and slowly walked toward the center of the dining room. Her reflection moved across the polished floor beneath her feet. When I was 24 years old, she said quietly, I worked 16-hour days. The room listened. I cleaned tables, washed dishes, carried supplies, answered phones. She smiled faintly. Some nights I slept in my office because I could not afford an apartment close enough to the restaurant. Brandon looked up. Naomi's voice carried no bitterness, only honesty. People often assume success begins when someone becomes visible. Her eyes moved across the room. The truth is that success begins when nobody notices you at all. Several employees nodded unconsciously. They understood exactly what she meant. Naomi stopped beside an empty table and rested her fingertips lightly against the chair. I remember customers who treated me with respect when I looked exhausted. Her smile softened. I also remember people who did not. Brandon felt a knot tighten in his chest. He already knew where this was going. Naomi turned toward him. Today was never a test of management skills. Her words landed softly. It was a test of character. The silence that followed seemed endless. Brandon lowered his head. For the first time all afternoon, he stopped trying to defend himself. You are right, he said quietly. Naomi waited. Brandon took a slow breath. I judged you before I knew anything about you. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. I saw your clothes. His voice sounded strained now. I made assumptions. The rain tapped gently against the glass behind him. And I was wrong. Naomi studied him carefully, not searching for perfect words, searching for sincerity. Ethan watched as well. So did every employee in the building. Brandon looked toward Lily. I was wrong about her too. Lily seemed surprised. Brandon swallowed hard. She showed kindness. I treated it like a problem. Naomi nodded slowly. The tension in the room shifted slightly. Not disappearing. Changing. Like storm clouds beginning to move. Brandon finally looked directly at Naomi. I cannot undo what happened. His voice was barely above a whisper. But I am sorry. Naomi held his gaze. Several long seconds passed. Nobody could predict what she would say. Then she asked a question that caught everyone off guard. If I had never revealed who I was, would you still be sorry? Brandon froze. The question struck deeper than everything that came before it. Because for the first time, there was no easy answer. No title to hide behind. No explanation to offer. Only the truth. And as the rain continued falling outside, Brandon realized this moment was not about losing a position. It was about discovering the kind of person he had become. Brandon did not answer immediately. Naomi's question remained suspended in the quiet air between them. Outside, the rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. Tiny streams of water slid down the glass, turning the parking lot lights into blurred ribbons of gold. Inside the restaurant, nobody seemed interested in leaving. Customers remained seated. Employees stood still. Everyone was waiting for the answer. Brandon finally looked up. His eyes were no longer searching for excuses. I would like to believe I would still be sorry, he said quietly. But the truth is that I do not know. Naomi studied him carefully. Surprisingly, she nodded. That is the most honest thing you have said today. A few employees exchanged glances. Ethan remained silent. He understood that this moment had become bigger than company policy, bigger than reports or evaluations. It was about accountability. Brandon released a slow breath. I spent so much time worrying about appearances that I stopped seeing people. Naomi listened. I told myself I was protecting the business. He glanced around the dining room. But I forgot what the business was actually built on. The words settled heavily over the room. Naomi's expression softened slightly. Not because the mistake had disappeared. Because recognition is the first step toward change. She turned toward the employees. Every company eventually becomes a reflection of what its leaders tolerate. Her voice remained calm and steady. Not what they write in manuals. Not what they print on walls. What they tolerate. Several workers lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly. Naomi looked toward Lily. Compassion cannot survive where people are punished for showing it. Lily blinked rapidly, trying to hold back emotion. Naomi smiled gently. You did the right thing. The young waitress nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Ethan stepped forward. There is another matter. His voice drew everyone's attention. He opened the folder once more and removed a single document. Brandon recognized the form immediately. His shoulders stiffened. Naomi looked at the paper, then at Ethan. Before we discuss that, she said, I would like to make one thing clear. Ethan paused. Naomi turned toward Brandon again. I did not come here looking for someone to fail. The room grew even quieter. I came looking for people who still understood why we exist. She glanced toward Lily. And I found one. The words seemed to affect Brandon more than any criticism. He lowered his head. Naomi continued. Leadership is not measured by how you treat important people. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. It is measured by how you treat people who appear to have nothing to offer you. A customer near the windows nodded slowly. Another wiped away a tear. The lesson had become impossible to ignore. Ethan looked at Naomi. What would you like me to do? Naomi considered the question carefully. The restaurant waited. Brandon waited. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Then Naomi looked at the document in Ethan's hand and surprised everyone with her answer. Put it away. Ethan blinked. Several employees gasped quietly. Brandon looked up in disbelief. Naomi's expression remained calm. Because before any decision is made, she said, there is something Brandon needs to see. She reached into her purse, removed the black notebook one final time, and opened it to a page no one else had seen. Naomi opened the notebook and slowly turned it toward Brandon. The page contained only two names. Lily Martinez. Brandon Whitmore. Nothing else. Brandon stared at the words in confusion. I do not understand, he said quietly. Naomi looked at him. Those were the only names I wrote down today. The room remained silent. One represents the future of this company, Naomi continued. The other represents a choice. Brandon swallowed hard. Naomi closed the notebook gently. Most people think leadership is about authority. It is not. Leadership is a decision people make every day. A decision to serve, to respect, and to recognize dignity in others. Her eyes moved toward Lily. Today, Lily made that decision. Then she looked back at Brandon. Today, you did not. The truth settled over the restaurant like a final verdict. Ethan stood quietly beside her, still holding the folder. Naomi glanced at it one last time. There will be consequences, she said calmly. Actions always have consequences. Brandon nodded. I understand. And for the first time all afternoon, he truly did. Naomi continued. You will no longer manage this location. A few employees inhaled sharply. Brandon closed his eyes briefly and accepted the words without argument. However, Naomi added, you will not be leaving this company. His eyes opened in surprise. Ethan looked toward her, already understanding where she was going. Naomi smiled faintly. Because I believe people can learn when they are willing to face the truth. Brandon stood speechless. Starting next week, you will begin a new position under a district training team. You will spend 6 months learning the values you forgot. Emotion flickered across his face. Not relief. Gratitude. Thank you, he said quietly. Naomi nodded once. Then she turned toward Lily. The young waitress looked startled. Lily Martinez. Yes, ma'am. Naomi smiled warmly. Compassion is not a small thing. It is the foundation of everything we built. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, ma'am. Naomi looked around the dining room one final time. Customers smiled. Employees stood a little taller. The atmosphere felt different now. Lighter. The rain outside had stopped. Soft afternoon sunlight began breaking through the clouds, casting golden reflections across the windows. Naomi walked toward the entrance. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back. Never assume you know someone's value by looking at them, she said. The world is full of people carrying stories you cannot see. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The lesson had already been heard. Naomi stepped outside. The fresh air carried the scent of rain and sunlight. Behind her, the restaurant doors closed softly. Inside, employees returned to work. Customers returned to their meals. Life moved forward. But something had changed. Brandon stood quietly near the front windows watching Naomi walk away. Not as the owner of a company, not as a powerful executive, but as a person who had given him an opportunity to become better than he had been that morning. Across the street, Naomi paused beneath the maple tree where she had sat earlier. Golden light filtered through the leaves above her. She took one last look at the restaurant, smiled gently, and continued down the sidewalk. And for the first time that day, Harvest Table looked exactly the way she had always hoped it would.